Hello, this Science of Sport video looks at BTEC Sport and Exercise Sciences course, Unit 2 Functional Anatomy, and we're focused in and trying to draw together all the information from Learning Aim F, the analysis of the skeletal and muscular systems and how they produce movement. And we've built up these videos to ultimately be able to answer question 12. The questions typically require you to use information about the muscular and skeletal system and apply that understanding to movement analysis. Now this one is part 5 or video part 5, which really looks at how can we prepare question 12, interpret the question, have the factual knowledge and then write it in a way which really enables us to access the top level marks, the level 3 marks. So let's just have a reminder of the specification for Learning Aim F. Learning Aim F draws together your understanding that the body can be divided into 3 sections for analysis, so upper body, trunk, lower body, that there are loads of different kinds of, there are several different kinds of types of bones, that there are different types of joints which allow different range of movement or are more related to stability. We have different bones which are shaped for different specific roles, or the bones shapes themselves allow different movements to occur or restrict other movements. Obviously you need to know the types of movements that occur at each joint and the planes they move in. You should also have learnt that we have different roles for our skeletal muscles, so you will need to know all the names of the major muscles of the body, learn them in pairs. We appreciate hopefully that there are muscles that make action happen, types of make the movements happen, the agonists. They have partner muscles that lengthen to oppose or control the movement. We have different roles of muscles as synergists and fixators, and also that muscles can contract in different ways, so concentrically, eccentrically or isometrically. More recently you should have learned that not only do our muscular and skeletal systems work together just to make us move, but we can move in more or less efficient ways. So we need to protect our muscle pairs, make sure we train both muscle pairs to prevent imbalances, that when we execute skills, we execute them in the right order, so joints work segmentally or in sequence to generate forces. And in question 12 you've got to draw on all of this understanding and show off in your answer that you can convey it appropriate to the question they're asking you about. Just to remind you, question 11 purely asks about the skeletal system, so it generally phrases it, analyse how the axial and appendicular skeleton, 3 joints or sections, and gives you a specific position to answer or write your answer about, and you must relate it to the answer very overtly in your writing. Question 12 does the same actually. It has a specific phrase, so it generally phrases the question, analyse the required movement. So firstly, if it's question 12, if it says required movement, we know that it not only wants skeletal information but wants muscular information as well. Apart from that, the other difference is it's worth 14 marks because it draws upon muscular information as well. But the structure of the question then is fairly similar. There are 3 joints or body sections it wants you to answer about. I want you to write 3 separate paragraphs, and it will always direct you to a very specific movement. So this one is from prep to execution phase. It gives you the specific shaded limbs that it wants you to refer to, and you must answer clearly in your writing, relating your answer to this movement. So just to remind you, we've used Mr. Justin Bieber to help us remember the content and the information that you must address in your question 11. So we had this acronym, Sexy Justin Bieber Plays Music, and that relates to whether it's axial or appendicular skeleton, the classification or type of synovial joint, the articulating bones and how the shape of those affect the movements that are possible, the range of movement at the type of joint, and of course the plane and movement that the specific question asks you to explain. You've got to relate this plane of movement to the question movement. So the question 12 acronym involves Sexy Justin Bieber playing music at concerts everywhere. So we've got 3 extra topics of information to integrate into our answer. Now, these three things, at refers to the types of muscle action that there might be. If you remember, there are 4 types of muscle action: agonists, antagonists, synergists and fixators. Concerts is a prompt for what type of muscle contraction, and there are 3 possible types of muscle contraction: concentric, eccentric, isometric. And everywhere refers to the movement efficiency, so the overall movement and how we may lose energy or waste energy or risk injury. And there are 6 different factors to relate possibly to that part of the question. So overall then, here is the whole content, all the information that you've got to draw upon to answer your question 11. Here's all the sexy Justin Bieber plays music at concerts everywhere information. This is the sort of topics related to that. And here's a little bit more of a breakdown about the information that you might need to include into your work. All of that should be familiar to you, but I've just summarised it on some slides. So you may well need to answer questions that relate to specific body sections, so different body sections. Certainly when we talk about the efficiency and we talk about kinetic chain or transferring movement across body sections, it may be important. A lot of the skills that we execute start with movement and energy production and force production at the lower limbs, the lower body, and transfer that information through the core muscles of our trunk up to our arms. For example, tennis, we generate force in our legs, transfer it and transmit it through to our arms. Joints is obviously classifications of joints, and there are 3 of those that you need to appreciate. The 6 types of synovial joint that you need to understand structurally and how their structure. So the cylinder and the trough of a hinge joint and how that only allows uniaxial movement, or the ball and socket, how that allows the greatest range of movement in all axes, or this ovoid shape sitting in a fossa of a condyloid joint. So you need to understand these different movements and how the bones are shaped, and the shape of those articulating bones affects the movement, the joint structure and the movement. Of course, there are different types of bones that you may need to comment on. And now we get into the muscular system, how we've got 4 roles that muscles may play. Antagonists and agonists are your basic ingredients. They must be in your answer. But the fixator and synergist role are very much icing on the cake. The extra things that a lot of students will not put in. And if you're wishing to get level 3 top answers, you've got to put in, you've got to acknowledge the role of those. Don't forget to talk about origins and insertions, and how if a muscle contracts, the force that it generates pulls on the insertion end of the muscle attached to the distal bone or part of the bone, or the distal end of the tendon is attached to the moving end of the bone. We've got different types of contraction that you must understand: isometric, concentric, eccentric, remember. So shortening the muscle length during contraction, the muscle lengthening during contraction, generally on the up phase, generally on the down phase to control movement against gravity, and isometric, that constant contraction. You can certainly talk about fixators contracting isometrically. If in doubt, talk about core muscles isometrically contracting to stabilize the trunk during execution of skills. And then again, we've got the types of movement that we have. Remember, you can throw in definitions of these movements, so you don't need to just say there's movement, there's flexion at the elbow joint. What you can say is this means the reduction of angle at the elbow joint, and all the definitions are here. You can pause the video and have a look at those. And we need to relate those movements to the plane that they move in. So all flexion and extension is in the sagittal plane, dividing our body into left and right sides. Don't forget that's almost the definition of that plane. All rotation is in the transverse plane, dividing our body into top and bottom halves. And all abduction and adduction is in the frontal plane, dividing our body into front and back halves. Lastly, we've got the E. So we've got the movement efficiency, and there are 6 aspects of movement efficiency that you might wish to comment about. I think these need a little bit of effort for you to get your head around. I think you should try to integrate one per paragraph, i.e. one per joint, and perhaps there might be some that are easier, that you find easier to remember. So in the movement efficiency video, I think that was part 4, I gave you some suggestions of the sorts of phrasing you might use, or the way you might remember the 6 of them. Just remember these 6 words, and hopefully that will prompt you as to what we mean. These are potentially the phrases you might use, but I think minimally you've got to pick the 3 that you find easiest to understand and remember, learn them, ideally learn all 6 that you can pick and choose which ones you put in. But minimally learn 3 that you think might be transferable, might easily relate to any movement. I think, for example, imbalance, muscle imbalance is one. Any movement that you're shown, you can talk about the agonist muscle and the antagonist muscle and how important it is for athletes to train both of those equally to avoid injury of the antagonistic muscle. So, again, just to summarise, this is the overview of the information that you've got to be able to write about in your question 12. So let's look closely at interpreting the question 12. Firstly, we need to just check and recognise that it's 14 marks, so you need to do more to earn your top grade. And the reason it's 14 marks is because not only does it ask you to analyse movement related to the skeletal system, but it wants you to show the interrelationship of the skeletal system with the muscular system. You can't move without those 2 systems working together. And actually it doesn't hurt to sort of state that in your answer. Anything that you overtly say to show that you are linking your answer to this question is really important. Next, we're going to recognise the phrasing. We know it wants skeletal and muscular system because it says analyse the required movement. Now, movement requires muscular action. So this is the phrase for question 12, always the same. Similar to question 11, it asks you about 3 joints or 3 body sections, and it also, similar to question 11, asks you to explain or analyse what's going on, what movement is occurring, or how we move from a position into another. So prep to execution is common. They give you a diagram, they give you an image, they give you a little bit more information, and they've directed you with shading to know which limbs, just so that hopefully you pick the right limbs in the diagram. And again, they said preparation to execution. So the shaded leg here goes from being extended to being flexed, and it asks you to talk about the hip and the knee of that leg, and the left arm here goes from being extended to being flexed. So it's asking you to talk about the movement from there into flexion. Similarly to the question 11, practice preparing and thinking about a table. So this is more or less the same table that you use for question 11. This sort of lighter shaded section here is the question 11 content. The right hand 4 columns are the question 12 new columns. So we've got the Sexy Justin Bieber plays music at. At requires you to talk about the muscle actions, the 4 roles that muscles play, creating movement. The main roles are the roles of the agonist and antagonist. This is your minimum ingredient content. So you must know what muscles make these movements happen. You've also got to know, so Justin Bieber plays music at concerts. The C was for contraction. What type of contraction is the agonist working in or working at? How is that muscle working? Many movements are concentric, but you may need to appreciate that some might be eccentric or isometric. I think the hardest bit to add in, and this is really your icing on the cake stuff, is the efficiency, the movement efficiency. And I've made this green because in my model answer, I've put my movement efficiency content in green. So there were 6 that you could choose from. So this was the acronym. He plays music at concerts everywhere. E was everywhere, and E relates to efficiency, movement efficiency. Now I've chosen to do these 3 movement efficiency bits of information in my write-up. Okay, so that's your planning fact table preparation. I'm going to show you next the mark scheme, really just to show you what the examiners provide, given that there's always opportunity for them to accept points that aren't in the mark scheme. Particularly the top level student will give extra information and show depth of knowledge. They haven't put every fact about every bit of the question here, so there's always scope to gain extra marks by showing off your depth of knowledge. But this would be our basic movement table. It's got the agonist and antagonist muscle. It's got the type of contraction. In here, they've sort of alluded to the efficiency, movement efficiency stuff. In fact, I'm going to make that green just to make it consistent. But they've given it as an extra. So additional factors, icing stuff, is this. This is your basic cake ingredients. You must know these facts. To get level 3 answers, you've got to have consistent, accurate knowledge. So you've got to get all your facts right. Break down the situation into component parts and relate them to the question. This is our blue stuff. And through each of these, I've tried to just identify where in their mark scheme they've given question context information. You've got a logical answer that's organised, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The additional icing stuff could be from talking about the roles of the fixators, could be talking about synergists, could be talking about how the fixators contract or how the synergists contract. It could be talking about the joint range of movement, so synovial joints being multi-axial and moving in all 3 planes. Talk more specifically about the bone shapes and how that affects movement or stability, and of course these 6 possible movement efficiency factors. So let's look at a model answer. I've written something for each of the paragraphs, for each of the joints, to try and show how you can pack your paragraphs full of show-off facts. So the white text is your kind of ingredients, your basic ingredients, the facts that you need to include to get your sort of minimum level 2 answer. The blue is me trying to show how you can relate to the question. You can say in the picture, in the movement, the athlete. So even saying in the step up, you're showing that you're relating your analysis to the image and to the specific movement that they want you to talk about. The red is the icing stuff. It's the extra stuff that you can include to show off to get your level 3 answer. And the green stuff is also icing information, but it's specifically the movement efficiency content. And I think this is sometimes a bit harder to incorporate. I wanted to therefore make it obvious where and how I was including it. So I suggest that you pause the video and read through this really slowly to absorb how I've included extra information to my ingredients to make this a level 3 type answer. It's things like not only saying it's flexion, but including the definition. Okay, that stuff is really good. It's not only saying that this athlete on the left leg is balancing dynamically so that the right leg movement can occur without wobbling, without going off balance and failing to do the movement. I've also given core muscles contracting isometrically, so their trunk is contracting isometrically to stabilize the trunk and the pelvis. I've actually named 2 core muscles. Transverse abdominis, which is a deep muscle, it's beneath your rectus abdominis, your normal 6-pack muscles. And I've named multifidus. It's a core muscle on your lumbar, your posterior, and it's beneath your erector spinae. And so giving that extra information really helps show off what I know. And the purpose of dynamic balance and these core muscles is to not waste energy. If you're wobbling off balance, if your trunk is sagged, you're not upright, you're losing form, you're losing energy. And any movement you do will be affected. Obviously it's things like naming the bone names and how their shape affects the range of movement, and how we know because they're synovial joints, we've got ligaments stabilizing those joints. Incidentally, I chose to do the right hip first, and I'm going to do the right knee next, because I think that in this action it's logical to talk about how the leg comes up and the arm comes up with it, but the leg is almost like the dominant part of the movement. So let's move on to the right knee. The right knee, again, I've related information to the action and to the movement from its extended preparatory position. So here, the athlete's right knee becomes, so I've said it's moving into a flexed position in the sagittal plane by the agonist hamstring muscle group. I'm showing off I know the names, or at least know one of the names if you can, and that it's concentrically contracting and it's applying force through the insertion onto the tibia and fibula. So I think the mark scheme only goes as far as saying it applies force through the insertion. It doesn't name where it is. If you can have a stab at naming the bone it attaches to, brilliant. Or saying that the insertion is at the distal end, brilliant. Extra show-off information. This shows how the musculoskeletal systems interrelate to create the movement shown. So I'm showing that I know the skeletal and muscular systems connect to make the movement happen. The hamstrings can be weaker, so in flexing at the knee joint, the hamstrings are the agonist muscle group. I've said that already, but I'm now going to recognise that there may be imbalances. This is one of my movement efficiency points. It's in green. Hamstrings can be weaker than the bigger, stronger quadricep muscles, who are the antagonistic muscle, so I need to state that, and antagonistic muscles relax to lengthen to control the movement or allow the movement or oppose the movement. So it's important that the athlete trains both muscle groups or muscle pairs to avoid imbalances and potential muscular injuries. So I'm just saying we've got to have muscle balance. We don't want imbalance because it will risk injury. That's my green show off extra stuff. Icing. Knee is part of the appendicular skeleton and is a hinged synovial joint. Basic ingredient. Due to the cylinder and shape of the distal end of the femur and the trough-like proximal end of the tibia, what a show off. If I'm just saying the bone names, that's fine, but I'm showing off about anatomical position, descriptive terms, I'm showing off about bone shapes. It's only uniaxial, I'm showing off about the joint knowledge, allowing flexion and extension at the sagittal plane. I'm showing off about synovial joint structure. A joint capsule lined with synovial membrane produces synovial fluid, which reduces friction during the step up. Sorry, just had to change that to blue because that's relating my facts to my movement. By lubricating the joints. Cruciate and collateral ligaments are important in stabilizing the knee joint, restricting unwanted lateral movement and preventing hyperextension. Extra icing detail about ligaments and joint stability. Last one, the left elbow. During the step action relating to the movement, the left elbow moves from extension to flexion relating to the movement. In the sagittal plane, dividing the body into left and right halves. Really, that should be red because that's extra icing information about my plane description. As it's part of the appendicular skeleton, basic fact, the flexed position is more mechanically efficient than executing the step up with straight arms. Basically, moving your arm forward, bent, is quicker than and more mechanically efficient than moving your arm forward if we had straight arms like you would do when you're marching. So it's more efficient to have a bent arm. Momentum from the flexed left elbow and shoulder movements help propel the athlete's right leg upwards. So actually when you run, it's your arm action, moving your arms frantically forward and backwards, that helps your legs move forward and backwards. One movement affects the other movement, and that's all that green sentence is saying. Showing off icing. The concentrically contracting biceps brachii agonist. So I've written 6 words and got that it's the agonist. I've named the muscle. I've said how it's contracting. 3 really critical ingredients. Shorten to pull. So I've said that the concentric means that the muscle shortens to pull on the distal insertion on the radius. Talking about the tendon, I've given a term as to where the tendon is, and it's the bone that it attaches to. The brachioradialis also contracts concentrically as a synergist. Extra movement or muscle action information. and the core muscles stabilise the trunk. Extra information. These are fixators. I could have had trunk as fixators, even better. Maintaining an upright body position. Extra icing. The trunks relax and lengthen to oppose the movement as the antagonist. Really, that kind of should be read as well. The elbow is also a synovial hinge joint and is uniaxial flexor. We know this. Showing off the olecranon process. So that's the knobbly bit on your elbow. That's what you can. That's what stops you being able to hyperextend. So when you straighten your arm, you can only do it so far because you've got a process at the proximal end of your ulna that stops you being able to move any further. I've packed it. You won't probably get that much information, but I just want to show you the sorts of stuff that you can throw in. So I've given you a basic structure with my acronym about Bieber here. It could be, however, that when you look at your question, you realise, for example, that there are similarities. So going back to my question, I know from the start that my elbow, hip and knee are all synovial joints. Therefore, there are lots of consistent or common features. Rather than writing out the same stuff every paragraph, I write more concisely and decide to chuck some of that information in one bit. So if there are similarities in the joints, rather than repeating this information in all 3 paragraphs, write concisely by reducing the volume of repetition and summarising the similarities. You need to be aware of this. You need to know ahead what you're going to do. For example, you might put at the start of your answer, all joints identified in the question are part of the appendicular skeleton and are synovial joints, which allow a relatively large range of movement. They are enclosed by a joint capsule and synovial fluid and are stabilised by ligaments, blah, 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 blah. So there might be some common stuff you wish to put to start off with to set the scene, rather than having to say that in every single one. So it depends on how confident you feel about moving away from that writing framework. Lastly, I just want you to show you that some student examples. Now, this actually was only a 9-mark answer, so this did not get top grade answer. Pause the video, have a read of it, and then I'm going to show you what the examiner said about it. So again, I want you to just take a moment, pause the video yourself and read through this. This is feedback from the main examiners about typically how students did on this question and the sorts of things they did well and the sorts of things they had issue with. And you'll see a pattern. It's the icing stuff that students really fail to consistently include in their answer. So finally, just to draw it back together, for question 12, it could be that you learn this acronym, Justin Bieber, Sexy Justin Bieber plays music at concerts everywhere, and we know now that we need to integrate skeletal and muscular information in order to get our level 3 answers. There are basic ingredients, and there are bits from all of these sections that can be icing, extra, additional information, particularly the movement efficiency bit. And there are 6 possibilities with which you can draw. I definitely require you to have one of those in each of your 3 paragraphs. So I hope that has helped you approach question 12.